Hi everyone. Welcome to Bookathon. For those of you who have been coming to other Bookathon events, or if this is the first one you're joining, we're so happy to have you here. I'm Lauren Melissa Ellzey. I'm going to be facilitating our fantasy panel of amazing readers for titled We're Off to See the Wizard. So I did not actually wear pigtails today because of that, but then I realized I was really on brand with our title, and I'm really excited to hear from all of our folks here today. Before we get really started, I thought I would just mention a few Zoom basics for the audience. So please set your screen to gallery view so you can see all of us. The chat roll is live for your comments, but if you have any questions, please pop those questions in the Q&A box, and we hope to have time at the end to take questions from our audience. With that being said, and we definitely invite you to use that chat to interact in any way, and hopefully we'll pull those questions. With that being said, we have an hour and we have really great things to dive into, really great readings to dive into. So we have Ann Shade here with us today. We have Suzanne Lenoir here with us. We have Sam Ledel here and Barbara Ann Wright. And so we might be joined by one more reader, and we'll see if they're able to make it. But let's get started. Let's get started with Barbara Ann Wright. So Barbara Ann Wright writes fantasy and science fiction novels starring LGBTQIA characters. She's won 6 Rainbow Awards, 2 Golden Crown Literary Awards, and has been shortlisted in the Forward Review Book of the Year Awards and the Lambda Awards. She's also made must-read lists on Tor.com, Book Riot, and Sci-Fi.com. Her newest book, Haunted by Myth, is a modern-day romantic comedy starring Ellen of Troy. With that, let's give it up for Barbara Ann Wright.
Thanks very much. You can tell I'm too used to Zoom meetings. Every time anybody's introduced, I wave at them when they wave back. Anyway, this is from chapter 1 of Haunted by Myth. Chloe's job often took her down some strange paths, like running through small town parks at 1 a.m., chasing the ghosts of Confederate officers while the muggy air of a Texas autumn bleached the sweat from her every pore. And this particular bastard was fast. Chloe spotted his ghostly shimmer through a gap in the line of trees. He'd switched directions yet again, but if Chloe stopped, her feet would refuse to restart. Who knew someone named Chester M. Goodspeed would live up to his name even after the son of a bitch had died? Chloe glanced at her watch where a timer ticked down. She had just over 40 minutes to send Goodspeed's spirit to the other side, or he could vanish, ready to rematerialize tomorrow and mess with the work crew trying to take down his statue again. Shit, she said, wheezing but grateful for the cardio she got in when she wasn't tracking down monsters or chasing ghosts through parks or museums or graveyards. Most spirits weren't very powerful, thank God. Any power they had only came from how many statues or carvings they had in the world and how well they were remembered. Chester M. Goodspeed was but a drop of history. Thankfully, Chloe had brought a flood. Ready to tap out, she heard in her mind, the tone teasing, but with enough affection that she didn't want to press and say that she could handle it. Yes, she said, slowing and putting her hands on her knees as her breath came so hard her throat ached. Her satchel felt like a bag of lead across her right shoulder. But only because you don't get tired, she said. Ramses II, third pharaoh of the 19th dynasty of Egypt, chosen of Ra, the greatest ruler of the New Kingdom, appeared before her and held out a hand lined in the blue fire of the powerful dead. Pay up, chump, he said. Chloe glared up at him. After you catch him. He shrugged before looking around, cracking knuckles he didn't have to crack. Chloe counted herself lucky he wasn't pretending to stretch with one leg on a tree. She'd seen up that pleated kilt one too many times. He's there, she said, pointing toward the farthest edge of the park. Goodspeed was trying to hide beneath a clump of bushes, but the soft white glow gave him away, especially with no moon and only the orange light of old streetlights lining the road. Run right and cut him off, Ramses said. I'll steer him toward you. Easy for him to say. Chloe threatened her body into moving again. Goodspeed couldn't go far from his statue, and he wouldn't be able to outrun Ramses for long. She dipped into her pocket and grabbed a plastic baggie full of salt and cayenne pepper. That should hold his ass long enough for her to banish him. She popped open the top, grabbed a small handful, and cocked her arm back, planning to nail him when Ramses chased him around the corner. There, his glow rounded a tree. She launched her arm forward, the cloud of dust catching the light. Someone screamed and coughed, a woman's voice, and a small dog started barking like a fiend. The light swung crazily, shining over a leash and a rabid-looking chihuahua, and a person trying to wipe their face while light came from their phone. Oh shit, Chloe yelled. Sorry, She looked behind the dog walker but couldn't see any glow. Are you freaking crazy? The dog walker backed into the dark street, towing a squirming dog that looked ready for some hearty disemboweling. Sorry, I'm, security, Chloe stammered, nerves swallowing the usual excuse she had ready. Just, go home, okay? Out of the corner of her eye, she saw the bright blue glow of Ramses on the other side of the park. Goodspeed had switched directions on him, too. Ah. Chloe turned her back on the dog walker before she could do something like start filming and darted between two trees and through some shrubs, hoping to catch Goodspeed on the other end of the park this time. She had to promise her body 3 full days free from workouts before it would run again. Come on, she muttered, hurrying for the right corner this time. She glanced at her watch again. 30 minutes left to get him. Damn, they might have to pack it in tonight and come back tomorrow, especially now that the dog walker was still shouting. And now another voice answered hers. Chloe turned, stumbling, trying to run backward while she peered through the trees. The strobing amber lights of a security car bounced around the park. Oh, that was all she freaking needed. The car passed by where the trees and shrubs hid her and stopped at the corner. The ghostly glows headed straight for it. The guard wouldn't see them, but if Goodspeed was smart... Oh no, Chloe yelled. Ramses, stop him! She ran harder, breaking through the trees just as the guard set foot on the sidewalk and Goodspeed dove into him as if into a deep pool. Shit! Chloe lunged, but the security guard turned in a jerky dance, limbs flailing as if he was being attacked by ants. Goodspeed wasn't that strong, so possession would sap his strength and push him out of the man's body soon enough. But before that, he could use the man to hide, use him as a hostage maybe, or use him to kill because there was more than pepper spray on that hip. Chloe jumped into a hedge as Goodspeed drew the guard's gun. She rolled behind a tree and halted, trying to hear if Goodspeed was coming for after her now. Come out and face me, you swine, Goodspeed said with the guard's mouth. The Confederacy shall not be defeated so easily. No, shut up, she muttered. Ramses walked through the tree and knelt by her side. Stuck in a human body, Goodspeed wouldn't be able to see him well, if at all. What are you thinking? He asked quietly. Wait him out? That sounded like a fine idea, except the dog walker was yelling, Did you get her? She threw something all over me and little Tiger. Chloe rubbed her forehead and groaned. We've got to do something before he shoots her or someone else. I am not taking Tiger home with us. Ramses cocked his head expectantly, brows raised. You know what we have to do. Being possessed won't make me bulletproof, she said. He waited, and his look continued to speak volumes. They had to disarm the guard quickly, and though she was getting better at self-defense, she wasn't as good as the leader of an ancient army. And combined, they were both stronger than they'd ever been alone. But goddamn, she hated being possessed. The end.
Thank goodness, because that was a wild ride and very, very fun to listen to. And as I was listening to it, just taking in the scene, it brought a question to mind, and I wanted to bring it your way. So I was wondering, how important do you think it is to balance fantasy with real life human experiences? And in what ways has it felt easy or challenging to strike this balance?
Well, with mine, it was very important because I wanted to set it in the real world. But I didn't want to just ignore things that were happening in the real world. So like the whole Confederate statue thing, it's like, I want to put this in. And someone like Chloe, who might actually have to deal with that sort of thing, since a bunch of the ghosts she does involve statues and stuff. So I think it's hard sometimes to strike the right balance because you don't want to distract from ghosts and goblins and whatnots. So I think the better you can work it in organically, the smoother the whole story will be.
Yeah, I feel that because you want to strike that balance. You want to show like the fantastical can exist in our world. And I think that's like a beautiful, like fun element of writing, fantasy writing, sometimes called low fantasy, which I think is an interesting term as someone who writes low fantasy myself. But yeah, I really enjoyed how you wove those elements together and struck that balance to bring readers into something magical while grounded in reality. So thank you for that. So that was Barbara Ann Wright. And we have some other folks to read today. And so we'll move on to Ann Shade. Ann Shade has a passion for writing stories about women who love women, whether it's contemporary, erotica, historical, intrigue, or fantasy. Ann's stories cross many genres with one common factor: BIPOC representation in all her main characters. Ann is the author of Femme Tales, Masquerade, Love and Lotus Blossoms, Her Heart's Desire, Securing Ava, and Three Wishes. She has also collaborated in 2 Bold Strokes books anthologies, In Our Words, Queer Stories from Black, Indigenous, and People of Color writers, and My Secret Valentine, 3 romance novellas. When Ann isn't writing, she's coordinating dream weddings and daydreaming about plans for her future bed and breakfast. So that, let's hear from Ann Shade.
I'll be reading from Three Wishes, which you can see back here, Three Wishes. And the scene I'll be reading from is when one of the main characters discovers something special about a lamp that she has purchased while on vacation. It took Elise almost a week to find the nerve to open the box with the lamp in it. Something about the whole experience spooked her. She wasn't a superstitious woman, but her grandmother believed in all that nonsense about spirits, people being called to things, and reincarnation. Ever since she told her grandmother about that first trip to Nose Bay, she had tried to convince Elise to meet with a past life regression therapist to see if there was a connection. Elise had refused, calling it all hoodoo, but now, as she opened the box and felt that same sense of belonging when she looked at the lamp, she wondered if there was something to all of that. Don't be ridiculous, she reprimanded herself. She carefully removed the lamp from its satin bed, placed it on her kitchen counter, and removed the silk wrapping. Surprisingly, the wrapping hadn't removed any of the dust. She took the edge of the material and gently began cleaning the lamp. She saved the opal for last, and she rubbed at the stone the lamp. Saved the opal for last, and as she rubbed at the stone, the lamp seemed to heat in her hand. It soon became too hot to hold, and Elise dropped it. As soon as it hit the floor, top popped off, and a plume of purple smoke billowed out of the lamp. In a panic, Elise turned and filled a nearby glass with water, spun back around, and tossed the water in the direction of the lamp. She stared in shock at a scantily clad woman standing over it, her hair dripping with water that she had thrown on her. The woman was dressed in a high-necked turquoise satin crop top with voluminous sleeves, a pair of matching harem pants, and bare feet. She knelt before Elise, raising her hands in supplication. Thou who hast summoned me from the lamp, it shall be my honor to grant you 3 wishes for whatever your heart desires. Elise gazed down at the top of the woman's head in confusion, trying to piece together what was going on. She had turned her back for just a moment, hadn't heard the beep from her security system from any of the doors and windows opening, and she hadn't left all morning. So how the hell did this woman get into her home? She slowly backed up toward the counter where the butcher block of knives sat and grabbed the largest one out of its slot. Who are you, and how'd you get into my house? She held the knife threateningly toward the woman, who still knelt on the floor. You summoned me, she said, peeking up at Elise through the long dark lashes. Her pupils were so dark, not even light seemed to reflect off them. She stared at Elise for a moment before her eyes widened in shock, and the darkness changed into a whirlpool of black with silver swirls, like pictures Elise had seen in the Milky Way. Aaliyah, the woman whispered as she slowly stood. Elise shook her head and thrust the knife forward. Stay back. I don't know who you or Aaliyah are, but I will cut you if you come any closer. I can't believe, after so long, we have finally found each other, the woman said, tears streaming down her face. I'm not going to hurt you. Please put the knife down. I can explain everything. Elise hesitated, looking the strange woman over. She was barely clothed, so she probably didn't have any weapons on her, and something deep within her told her the woman was telling the truth, that she wouldn't hurt her. She set the knife on the counter, but kept it within reach. She also reached into the pocket of her phone and pulled out her cell phone, the pocket of her robe and pulled out her cell phone with 911 ready to dial, just in case. Start talking. That's it. Short and sweet.
Short and sweet, but packed with a punch, or I guess a knife, maybe. But thanks but thanks for that reading and sharing. The sounds like the beginning of quite a fantasy adventure and Three Wishes. And
Yes.
with genies and all of that, I have to wonder, what was your process around deciding the fantasy elements of your story, such as rules around supernatural abilities, around lore, social dynamics, all of that? Like, what was your process with that?
I secretly have always wanted to write fantasy novels. I just never thought I was that I was brave enough to do it. And I delved into it a little bit with a mermaid story in one of the anthologies I did. So I figured I would try and dive into it. I love the thought of genies. I love the thought of the magic lamp. And speaking to a young woman who said she'd always wanted to see an Aladdin story for queer women, I said, okay, I can do that. So I wrote the story and the lore. It fascinated me when I started doing research on the Jinn culture. And it is there is the Jinn culture. They are people, and there's a whole thing around their culture and their magical abilities and their realms and planes and things like that. So it really fascinated me, and I loved being able to write something like that and to put all that in this story without giving a lesson, but making it fun and whimsical and something interesting for people to read.
Well, thank you. Wow, learn something new every day about Jin people and culture. Have to look into that
Yes,
for sure. And thank you again, Anne, for sharing from your book today. So,
you're welcome.
and move along to our next reader, and that would be Suzanne Lenoir. So, Suzanne Lenoir is originally from the East Coast and is currently a resident of Cincinnati, Ohio. Her Val Moran fantasy series novels, A Talent Within and A Talent Ignited, combine her love of YA fantasy with her interest in medieval history. Suzanne is a technophile, video gamer, history buff, and avid reader who loves EDM and builds model siege engines. She lives with her adventurous, spreadsheet-loving wife and her blind, toothless chihuahua. So with that, let's hear from Suzanne Lenoir.
Thank you so much. I'm going to be reading from my book 2 in the Val Moran series, Talent Ignited. Annika rolled her eyes and sighed. How many times would she have to heal this carrot? Her hand glowed. The carrot sealed itself. Jordana took the knife and sliced it again. Annika marveled at how capably Jordana handled everything with just one hand, but she had no intention of telling her. Maiden's eyes, how many times do you want me to do this? Haven't I proved I can heal on demand? Again. Annika groaned. We've done this for days. I'm tired of healing. Fine. Jordana set a candle on the stone seat between them. Extinguished the fire. Annika blew out the flame, doused it. She smiled and crossed her arms. She could tell from Jordana's expression that she wasn't amused. Jordana lit the candle again. With your gift. Annika threw her arms in the air. I'm so tired of this. I'm no closer to understanding any of what I can do. Jordana picked up the carrot and thrust it at her. The carrot says otherwise. I'd prefer to eat the carrot than heal it. Annika saw Jordana as the unwanted older sibling of Mercius, the boy who'd followed her around the village and taunted her about her way and heritage. Can you take this seriously? I don't want to be here with you any more than you do. You're so unlikely to be anything important for as powerful as you claim to be. I never claimed to be anything, which is why you'll never be anything, at least not in the eyes of the temple. For the last time, I don't want to be. Then what do you want to be? Annika paused. Something that would make her parents proud? The person Evelyn could love? But a hero was not one of them. Then the image of the last child who'd been taken to safety flashed through her mind. He had no choice in his life either. I need to find Evelyn. Evelyn made her feel safe, and she needed to feel safe. Jordana's expression changed. Her eyes narrowed, but her voice lightened. You said she has the paladin's mark. How did you strip him of his gift? Annika thought back to the moment on the aqueduct when Lothair had moved to kill Evelyn, how she'd made everything stop, how she'd known that she'd freed him of his gifts. I touched him. Touched him? Yes, with my fingertips. What were you thinking when you did it? I wanted to relieve him of his pain. He hated his role. He'd said he hated what he did. He hated being reviled. I don't understand. Jordana stood and paced. Could you return it to him if he were here now? Annika stiffened. Lothair alive and here would be the worst thing she could think of. No, she snapped. Even if she could, she would never give him back his gift. He would only make Balmora worse. Evelyn deserved his power, if indeed she had received any of it. I need to understand what you did to him, Jordana asked. Annika felt pressured. The room felt smaller. There's nothing else to tell. Jordana's voice became unexpectedly sweet. Let's work on reaching Evelyn, shall we? Annika was wary of the sudden change in tone. Reach for me, Jordana waited by the shrine. Go on. Annika was afraid of the one thing that had stopped her from trying before now, seeing beyond the grave. She shook her head. I can't. Can't? Of course you can't, Jordana taunted. You aren't worthy of your gifts. You're frightened of everything. Do you want to find her or not? The challenge made her angry. Of course I do. Doesn't seem like it to me. Your resistance makes me think you'd prefer not to stand in her shadow. Afraid maybe your friend can do more with Lothair's mark than you can do with your own. Annika let the words fill her until she felt her gift growing, pushing her other thoughts aside. A tunnel appeared in her vision, soft on the edges, and magnified her view of Jordana. But instead of stopping when they were connected, Annika extended her reach deeper, much deeper. Jordana's past swept by, her lived moments in reverse. Moments with Eugenie, moments on the street, struggling with her stunted arm, a momentary flash of Braga, and then a teenage Lothair smiling at her. Annika drew a sharp breath. She broke the connection to find Jordana on her knees, her hands covering her head. You bitch! You should never have been given a single gift, much less half a dozen.
Wow. Wow. That from carrots to like mine past reading, we went a full circle. Well, not a circle, but took quite a journey there, I would say. And within it, I heard you use a particular word that often, perks up my ears when I think of fantasy, and that was the word hero. And I heard that in your reading, and it made me want to ask you, because oftentimes in the fantasy genre, things center around a hero overtaking a villain. And in what ways have you explored the dynamic between hero and villain through your writing?
Okay, so, I only got 2 books so far under my belt. But one of the things that in the first book, at least, one of the things that I didn't want to have was, even though my heroes are on a hero's journey, I mean, it's just such a universal thing, in storytelling. they are on that path, but I didn't want them to be the 5-minute hero. And like, I love Star Wars, but I mean, seriously, Luke Skywalker got 5 minutes of training and then bang, he can do everything, right? It's, so I didn't want that, and I didn't want a villain that was evil for evil's sake, or who was so powerful that you, from the beginning, you're like, how are they ever going to stop this guy? And I just wanted there to be something, about the villain that says sometimes villains are made rather than just being a villain. And so in the case of my villain, he's very charismatic and handsome and well respected. And so then you have to dig a little deeper and understand that what he does because he thinks he's protecting everyone, so, and where he's there to make my two heroes become heroes, yeah. They don't just start out that way. That's not what they planned for themselves, as you saw in my reading. That's not what she wants
Yeah.
for herself.
Definitely, like sometimes falling into the circumstances that can transform someone into a hero. And that journey is within the writing itself, within the story itself, like what makes a hero. So thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Thank you for having me.
Our next reader, Sam Ledel. Sam Ledel grew up in the DFW Metroplex of Texas. After graduating with her BA in creative writing, she found a calling in education and has worked in the field for over a decade, including during her time in Peru, serving in the Peace Corps. So let's take a listen to Sam Ledel.
Hi, everybody. All right, today I'll be reading from Heart of Stone, my latest fantasy novel. The story follows two young women. The first is the Princess Kiva Glantor, a monarch who would rather practice her combat and archery skills than actually lead. She meets Maeve one day when unruly villagers attack Maeve's fen, believing her to be an evil fae. The passage I'll be reading today is from Kiva's point of view. She's gone to check on Maeve after the harrowing attack, curious about the woman who refused to reveal herself when they first met. Kiva stood outside Maeve's humble dwelling in the fen. The tattered, faded red curtain flapped in a quick breeze in the small window to her right. The movement teased her, beckoning her gaze while unwilling to reveal the woman inside. Maeve, she said, watching the door, expecting it to open any moment. Are you certain you're all right? If you would step outside so I can know, she said, squinting at the tiny space near the jamb when the door sat off kilter. I would like to see for myself. Kiva scanned the fen, taking in the incredibly lush lowland with grass that came to her shins. She brushed off some of the damp leaves that stuck to her tunic and pants from her earlier efforts to maneuver through the thick trees that line this marshy lowland. She examined the boulders stacked tightly within the walls of Maeve's home. The green from the ground had climbed up nearly the entire height, moss and lichen crawling over layers of gray rocks to claim it as part of the fen. The thatched roof looked sturdy, but old. How long had this woman been here? Maeve's voice interrupted her thoughts. Thank you for coming. Your people have a kind princess. Kiva placed her hands on her hips, perplexed by the words and the door remaining closed. She didn't understand why Maeve was being so obstinate about hiding. Nor was she accustomed to her requests being ignored. A distant shout came from the river. Donovan must have noticed she was gone. She'd recruited a small group of guards to begin sorting through the rubbish of the river. They had started to clear debris from the water when she'd slipped away. Now, knowing she didn't have long before her brother found her, she asked, Is somebody in there with you? Why do you keep yourself inside? I'm alone, Maeve replied. Kiva stepped toward the window again. When she did, a low hiss sounded from inside. Well, Rowan is here. Rowan? A large silver snake slithered out the window, gliding over the sill and down the wall. It was the same one from the other night. Gods, Kiva leapt back. Her spellfire sprang to life in her right hand. Her knuckles recalling the cold scales. The snake coiled in front of the door. It raised its head, its neck a menacing S, while it continued to hiss. That's Rowan, Maeve explained from inside. Keeping her eyes on it, Kiva asked, You live with a snake? Yes, Maeve said matter-of-factly. Kiva shook her head. This entire situation was becoming more befuddling by the minute. Why don't you come out? Maybe, she thought, there was some sort of curse or spell keeping Maeve from leaving. I can't. Then Kiva remembered what Nayla had said about the attack from Dane. You know, she said, trying to keep her voice even as the snake's gleaming skin shimmered intimidatingly. Dane said you were a witch. Did you do something to him? Did a spell backfire? I'm not a witch. The snake Rowan sat posed, ready. Frustrated, Kiva extinguished her spellfire and held up her hands, though she knew how absurd it was to believe the snake would interpret this as meaning no harm. To her surprise, though, he lowered his head and quelled his hissing. Tell me who you are, then. I told you my name. Why are you here? Why are you alone? The snake hissed. Pardon me, why are you with your companion snake? A soft chuckle came from the other side of the door. Kiva smiled. You know, it's not every day you stumble upon a woman with a guardian as fierce as this. The snake tilted his head. Perhaps you're a goddess. Another laugh. Sensing an opening, Kiva stepped closer. The snake, evidently matching Maeve's change of demeanor inside, slithered aside before moving back up the wall and disappearing through the window. I'm not a goddess, Maeve finally replied. Please, Kiva said, why don't you open the door? I can't, she repeated. The resignation in her voice made Kiva pause. She reached out, pressing against the door. Hesitating a moment, she pushed gently, but had hardly done so when there was a flurry of movement on the other side of the door, then a sound like Maeve had thrown herself against it. Don't! Kiva pulled her hand back. I'm sorry, I don't understand. I can't open the door. Why? It's too dangerous. What does that mean? Kiva pressed her ear closer. She thought she heard Maeve take a deep breath, as if whatever she was to say next took every ounce of her being. Meanwhile, the heavy tread of Donovan's steps drew near. I can't open the door for you. I can't open it for anyone. Why? Keeves? Donovan's shout was just on the other side of the trees. She pressed her palm to the door. Please, you can tell me. I can't open the door because... Maeve's voice shrank. She must have heard Donovan too. Why? Because I'm a Gorgon. Clambering through the brush, Donovan called, Kiva, what are you doing? She ignored the question. She didn't meet what she knew was his incredulous gaze. All she could do was stare at the door in disbelief. Maeve's voice was sad when she said quietly, It was nice to meet you, Princess. Thank you.
Thank you. What a scene. What that was painted there, from the setting through the conversation and the whole fantastical element of it all. And from it, I just got this sense, the love of fantasy, the love of fantasy in general, and world building and things like that from you. And so it made me want to ask you, what drew you to the fantasy genre? Was it a specific book, story, an experience? What brought you to fantasy?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think the first books that come to mind that could fit the fantasy genre are some books I read in childhood. The Magic Treehouse series by Mary Pope Osborne, two siblings that have a magic treehouse that takes them kind of through time and through history. I was also of the Harry Potter generation that was raised kind of on those books. So just I think the idea of another world that was just different from my own, or even, similar in a lot of ways, but had kind of like what you were talking about with Barbara Ann, with the a world that is familiar but has a few kind of fantastical elements to it. That was really appealing to me growing up, and a sense of escapism, I think, too, just to be able to fall into another world or another time, or both, for a while was really appealing. So that's what drew me to the genre.
Yes, and to go from being drawn into that world by others and drawing them into your own fantastical worlds of your creation is a wonderful full circle in a lot of ways. So thank you for sharing with us, Sam. And that brings us to our final reader for today, although we will be taking additional questions at the end as well. So remember to pop your questions into the chat. But in the meantime, we are going to hear from Genevieve McCluer. Genevieve McCluer was born in California and grew up in numerous cities across the country. She studied criminal justice in college, but after a few years and a stint in law enforcement, moved her focus to writing. Her whole life, she's been obsessed with mythology from around the world and bases her stories in many of those myths. So let's hear from Genevieve McCluer.
Okay. My latest book is a second chance at life. It's the excerpt is about the main character Dina with her parole hearing to get out of prison to be with her wife again, and yeah. Okay. How is it still not time? It feels like I've been waiting for hours. And what about Rachel? If I'm going home, that means I'd be going home to her. She may even be here. Hell, maybe she's talking to them right now. I'm still not super clear on the whole process. I know I make my case, but I don't know if I'm the only one who does. I breathe in and detect a faint hint of lilac and vampire. She must be here, but there are other scents too. I'm too nervous. Every time I try to focus on her, she tangles up with another smell. Is one of them my therapist? It smells a little like her, but I'm not sure. There might even be more vampires. There are quite a few humans nearby. Will we really be okay? I've tried so hard to go back to the relationship we used to have, but as much as I've tried to ignore it, we're not the same people we used to be. My therapist said that I need to focus on getting to know her again, and then if we both put in the effort, then it can be amazing. I thought it'd be easy. It's Rachel. We've always been able to move past any change, but then I pushed her away, and she made a life without me. Just like I wanted, and yet I don't know that I can get over it. I'm a murderer. It doesn't matter how little I meant to do it, I still did. Do I have the authority to judge her for accepting support and help where she could find it? The fact that she's a murderer as well should really affect my judgment, but it doesn't. She's still her. And maybe once we've had time to get used to each other for real, without all the awkwardness of visitations and ATAs, maybe it can be like it used to be, or even better. Our relationship has gone through so many forms. What's one more? Finally, the door opens. I don't look up immediately as I'm still panicked about the whole thing and need a moment. But when I do look, I swear I see that cop going around the corner. Right, his dad was on my case. I knew some police officers would be testifying that I shouldn't be afraid. I don't know why I'm surprised to see him. I stand and get a reassuring smile from a familiar woman in a pantsuit. Mrs. Goodeitina must have just been talking to them. They're ready for you. I nod, trying to find my voice. Don't be so scared. Just be honest with them, and you'll probably get it. They don't like to reject parole if they can avoid it. I needn't to hear that. Thanks. Plus, you can make them. I try to laugh, but it barely comes out as a noise. I breathe in, attempting to calm myself. That lilac scent seems to be fading. Maybe it was only in my head. I hope she's here, or maybe she already left and it was only a remnant that I caught earlier. As much as I'm still struggling with what she did, I feel so much better when she's around. I walk through the door and find a table with a chair facing a far longer table with a collection of people in nice clothes, all studying me like I'm a particularly interesting rat in a maze. Do I get cheese? I'd like cheese. Or chocolate. Or blood. Probably not heroin, though. I mean, I'd like it, but I shouldn't. I should stick to chocolate. I sit and look between them, trying to hide the panic from my face and almost certainly failing. Didn't I practice a speech? I feel like I had something planned. There were words in it. I bet they were compelling. Some of them probably included my name. Am I supposed to say that? Or maybe hello? Mrs. Goodnightina walked me through all of this. Why don't I remember any of it? Am I really that scared? I've never had to give a speech before. I dropped out of high school a few weeks before I would have had to do my first. Dina Pelletier, one of them asked. That's probably my name. Not too sure of anything right this second, but it sounds right. Yeah, I try to breathe and make a weird whimpering noise that can't possibly make me look better. I will not cry. I close my eyes before tears can finish swelling. I won't make a fool of myself. I open them and stare straight ahead, trying to ignore the people watching me. Yes, I'm Dina. You're supposed to be 44. That's what the birthday card I got from my wife says. I'm joking. I mean, it's the truth, so I'm not really joking, but I shouldn't be joking to the parole board. Why do I joke when I'm nervous? It's not even a good joke. Yes, I'm 44. I can feel eyes on me. I still can't bring myself to look at them, so I'm looking at the wall behind them, right over their heads. One of them says. They're going to realize I'm a vampire. I have to do something. Wasn't there? Oh, right. Okay, I know what to do. I was freaking out the last time I compelled a whole group too, so maybe that'll help. I look exactly like I should for being 44. I've been on perfect behavior, and I deserve the chance to be free and to live with my wife. The room spins and I have to fight to stay awake. Why does it still take so much out of me? I thought it was because I was starving, but compelling a whole group must just do that to a vampire. I wonder if it gets easier with time and practice, or if any vampire will always struggle with it. Right, of course. She looks 44. It must have been the fluorescent lights, one of them says. Another mutters in agreement. They all look old. There are gray hair and gray jackets, but I still can't bring myself to look them in the eyes. They're deciding if I'm allowed to be free. It's too much. It's overwhelming. How can anyone be expected to go through this? She's seeing a therapist. She's a first-time offender, and her wife has vouched for her. So she was here? I don't see any reason not to release her to her family. Someone is going to argue. They'll stop me. I won't get to go free. I needed more blood. It wasn't a good enough compulsion. Yes, I agree, another says. She's been a model inmate, and she's ready to return to society. I don't see any reason she should remain in prison. Wait, they keep agreeing. Are they actually going to release me? She looks 44, one adds. I may have fried his brain a little. I need to stop doing that. I should never compel anyone again. He'll get better, right? Will Landry? I know I'm doing it for Rachel, but how can I really be a better person if I keep hurting others? Dina Pelletier, tomorrow you'll be released into paper rustles. Mrs. Rachel Pelletier's custody. Your parole officer is Officer Michael Jefferson. He'll be in contact with you. He'll be in contact soon with everything you should know. You may leave.
Right, vampires on trial. Love it. And also, I do have to say, I want to get a bottle of lilac and vampire. Sounds like a great scent. But in this story, there is like court parole, some kind of proceeding, this idea of prison, and it made me think about real life society again and how it can be embedded into fantasy. But also, it made me wonder about how fantasy writing at times can reveal aspects of real life society in ways that realistic fiction can't always do. So I was wondering, are there any contemporary topics that you have explored, particularly through fantasy?
Yeah, there's quite a few. From my other books, I've had Cold Blood being heavily about American intervention in the Middle East. Fairy Tale uses fair one and human interactions to explore how divergent cultures affect relationships and different family reactions to coming out. And then A Second Chance at Life is very much about addictions and how prison really doesn't prepare you for, well, being human again, if you will. And that returning to relationship after that long absence, and it all gets a lot exaggerated because Dina went into prison as a scared 19-year-old, and 25 years later she's coming back still as a scared 19-year-old. She for a lot of people in prison, they don't really get that time to mature, and the world just moves on without them. And when you literally don't age, that gets to be even more so.
And using that almost metaphor of the vampire to demonstrate that is really, I think, really puts how fantasy can talk about these things in this different way, but reveal the intricacies of those difficult contemporary situations. So thank you so much, Genevieve, for sharing with us that reading. And I would love to invite all the panelists back for some group question time. We have a little bit of time left before 5 o'clock. So, and different questions that we can all explore and discuss together. If any questions come up from the audience in the chat, I would be happy to share those with our panelists as well as we talk about fantasy and all the ins and outs in between. So to kick us off, a little bit of group discussion, I'm wondering about mythology and folklore and things like that. We've heard about Fae here. We've heard about, Helen of Troy and all these different things. And I know that personally, I think a lot about fairies and Fae folklore as I write. I just love fairies, whether or not they're from Neverland or they live under the ground in the Unseelie Court. So I would just love to hear from you all. How has mythology and folklore particularly influenced your writing? And which particular myths or folklores are those greater influences for you?
Do we just hop in here? Or
Yeah, just hop on in.
Okay, all right.
We have
I'm happy.
about 3 to 5 minutes.
Oh,
So,
okay.
yeah,
Well,
let's
I'll
just
make it
hop
quick.
in.
I've always loved folklore because it seemed like magic tales from this world, like back when the world was cool. But like now it's not cool anymore. So that's what always drew me to them, was it was like making the actual world fantastical and magical, and that's why I love them so.
I think I just like the whole fantasy aspect of it, and especially weaving it into a contemporary society and making it fit in there. I feel like contemporary stories that have that current twist, like you said, the Unseelie Court. Is that Sarah Maas that writes those? Um,
Sarah Maas is one of the writers that writes
yeah,
about
yeah. So
Sealy, but she definitely
I've
didn't
read
make it
her
up.
thing. Yeah. I read her things and I love how they take like the fantasy and make it into a contemporary society. Same thing that Bray Willows does with the gods and the different religious aspects, and how they've become part of like a corporation, and running the religious world. It's pretty cool to weave those into each other. So I like doing something like that with taking the fantasy and the folklore and making it into something contemporary. We can see it every day.
I'll jump in next and say that I love mythology. I was one of those teenagers that was just obsessed with like Greek and Roman mythology. And I incorporate I incorporate a fair amount of like Irish and kind of like mythology in my fantasy novels, with a lot of different fae creatures. There's everything from like tree nymphs and sirens to selkies in my fantasy trilogy. The Heart of Stone, the one I just read from, is kind of a retelling or a twist on the Gorgon myth and Medusa. And so that was really fun to do. So I like pulling from standard myths and seeing kind of what I can do to make them my own.
I like using a lot of lesser known myths. Like obviously, I like the rest of you. I grew up with, you know, reading Greek mythology, then Egyptian mythology, and Norse mythology, and so on. But like one of my previous books drew heavily from Lithuanian mythology, which was a lot of fun to explore, and also really difficult to do research on, with even my Lithuanian stepmother not having any helpful answers for any of my questions. But it really lets you do a lot to explore different cultures and spread some tales that people wouldn't normally get to hear.
As the last one in this group, I got to say that my stuff is way more history based than mythology based. So I went more for the historical and the just the ins and outs of Catholicism, kind of exploring that, even though it's not a Catholic world. I used a lot of the Catholicism and kind of the mythology around Catholicism that came from the Middle Ages. So, but I, like everybody else, I love mythology.
Yeah, I think mythology, history, folklore, whether or not one focus or focusing on all three, weaving it in and out of fiction is just a wonderful way to build a magical, fantastical experience for readers. And with that, I would like to close this out, bringing our attention again to the links in the chat, to explore. I invite you all to explore and, read from these amazing panelists today. And I wish you a wonderful bookathon and some journeys where you go off to see the wizard. Have a great evening, everyone.